everyone, welcome back to i-TUTOR IAS Academy Tamil Nadu History NCERT series. Today we are discussing Unit 12, that is British India after 1858. Okay, so through this chapter we are discussing three personalities, that is Lord Linton, Lord Ripon and Lord Curzon. Okay, so if we're discussing this period, British India after 1858, the period of British rule in India after 1858, it's known as British Raj or Crown Rule. It began with the transfer of power from the East India Company to the British Crown following the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Okay, so this era lasted until India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947. Okay, and the key changes are direct governance, that is the Government of India Act 1858 abolished the East India Company and the dual government system. Board of Control and Court of Directors are there, and the Viceroy. Of course, the Lord Canning was the first to hold this title, Viceroy, and Secretary of State. A new office, the Secretary of State for India, was created in London to oversee Indian affairs. So this official was a member of the British cabinet and was assisted by a 15-member Council of India. And princely states, the British abandoned the doctrine of lapse and the policy of annexation, guaranteeing the independence of over 560 princely states as long as they accepted British sovereignty. Okay, so these are the key administrative changes happened after British India after 1858. And the British Parliament passed several acts to reform governance and manage growing nationalist demand. That is, Indian Council Act 1861 introduced a portfolio system and allowed for limited Indian participation in legislative council for the first time. And Morley Minto reform, 1909 Morley Minto reform, that significantly expanded legislative council and introduced separate electorates for Muslims, more often cited as root of later communal division. Next is Montagu Chelmsford reform, that is on 1919. It introduced diarchy, that is dual government at the provincial level, and expanded Indian representation. Also, Government of India Act 1935, the most extensive reform. It provided for provincial autonomy and proposed an all India federation, through the federation never fully materialized. And infrastructure, economic impact, and education and law also changed after this British India after 1858. And the rise of nationalism, the later half of this period saw the emergence of the Indian National Congress, that is on 1885, and the Muslim League 1906, and leading to mass movement under leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, that eventually forced the British withdrawal in 1947. Okay, so that is the overall about picture about the British India after 1858. Okay, and in this chapter we will discuss Lord Linton's policies on famine, the Indian press and trade, Second Afghan War, Lord Ripon's reform in the field of education and local self-government, and the Ilbert Bill controversy and Ripon's attitude towards Indians, and Lord Curzon's reform and partition of Bengal. Okay, so this much we discuss in this chapter. These are three heroes: Lord Linton, the time period is 1876 to 1880, and Lord Ripon and 1880 to 1884, and Lord Curzon 1899 to 1905. Okay. So after the 1857 revolt, the responsibility of ruling India was directly assumed by the British Crown, and Lord Canning became the first Viceroy of India in 1858, and the Government of India Act 1858 and the Queen's Proclamation in the same year signify this change in the Indian administration. The Queen's Proclamation remained the basis of the British policy in India for more than 60 years, and the administration of Lord Linton, Ripon and Curzon were important during this period. So this is Queen Victoria. And first of all, we will discuss about Lord Linton. The time period is 1876 to 1880. Lord Linton was an experienced diplomat and a man of striking ability and brilliance. And the British Prime Minister Disraeli appointed him as Viceroy of India, and the prevailing famine and the political disturbances in the northwest frontier caused a great worry to British at that time. And his famine policy, the famine of 1876 and 78, had resulted from the failure of two monsoons. It covered an area of 250,000 square miles and affected 58 million people. And the worst affected area were Madras, Mysore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, that is Bombay, Central India, and the Punjab. And it took a toll of 5 million lives in a single year. And the outbreak of cholera and fever added to the misery of the suffering population. And Lyndon's government failed misery to tackle the situation, and the government relief measures seemed to be inadequate. And the first famine commission, that is 1878 to 80, under Sir Richard Strachey, was appointed, and it made many commendable recommendations. And they include provision of fund for famine relief and construction work in the annual budget. The famine code came into existence in 1883. Vernacular Press Act and the Ham Act 1878. The 1878, the Vernacular Press Act was passed. This act empowered a magistrate to secure an undertaking from the editor, publisher, and printer of a vernacular newspaper that nothing would be published against the English government, and the equipment of the press could be seized if the offence was committed. And this act crushed the freedom of the Indian press, and this created adverse public opinion against the British government. In the same year, the Arms Act was passed, and this act prevented the Indians to keep arms without appropriate license. Its violation would be a criminal offense, and the Europeans and Anglo Indians were exempted from the operation of this legislation. And other reforms, the Lord Lytton introduced uniform salt tax, uniform salt tax throughout British India, and he also abolished many important duties and supported the free trade policy, and this had seriously affected the Indian economic interest. The system of decentralization of finance that had begun in the time of Lord Mayo was continued during the time of Lord Lytton. The provincial government were empowered with some control over the expenditure of all provincial matters like land revenue, exercise, stamp, law, and justice. Linton wanted to encourage the province in collecting the revenue and thereby strengthen the financial power and position of the provinces. In 1878, the statutory civil service was established exclusively for Indians, but this was abolished later. Okay, so these are the other reforms by Lord Lytton. And Lord Lytton and Second Afghan War was happened 1878 to 80, and Afghan policy of British was based on the assumed threat of Russian invasion of India. The first Afghan war, that is on 1838 to 42, proved to be a disastrous one for the British in India. When Lord Lytton was appointed the Viceroy of India, and he was instructed by the Home Government to follow a forward policy, and the Russian attempt to send a mission to Afghanistan was the main cause of the Second Afghan War. And soon after the outbreak of the war in 1878, the British troops captured the territory between Kabul and Kandahar. The ruler of Afghanistan, Sher Ali, fled from his country and died in 1879, and his son Yaqub Khan became the ruler, and the British concluded the Treaty of Gandamak with him. A British resident was sent to Kabul, but soon he was murdered along with the other British officers by the Afghan rebel. Although the British troops were able to recapture Kabul, and the difficulties in holding it increased due to the activities of the rebel, and suddenly in 1780, Lytton was forced to resign by the new government in England. Lytton's Afghan policy was severely criticized because he was responsible for the murder of the British officer, including the resident in Kabul. During his administration, millions died due to famine, and the Vernacular Press Act undermined his credit. Okay, so this is the Linton and the Second Afghan War. And next is Ripon. Lord Ripon. The time period of Lord Ripon is after uh, Lord Linton, that is 1880 to 84. Okay, 1880 to 84. And Lord Ripon was a staunch liberal democrat with the faith in self government. He was appointed as the Viceroy of India by Gladstone, the Liberal Party Prime Minister of England. And Ripon was instructed to reverse the Afghan policy of Linton. Therefore, as soon as he came to India, peace was made with Afghanistan without affecting the British prestige. The proposal of appointing a resident in Kabul was dropped, and he was also responsible for the addition of Mysore to its Hindu ruler. And moreover, he repealed the Vernacular Press Act and earned much popularity among Indians. Then he devoted himself to task of liberating the Indian administration. Okay, so that is Lord Ripon. Introduction of local self-government 1882. Ripon believed that self-government is the highest and noblest principles of politics. So therefore, Ripon helped the growth of local bodies like the municipal committees in town and the local board in taluks and villages. The powers of municipalities were increased. So their chairman were to be non-officials. They were interested the care of local amenities, sanitation and drainage and water supply, and also primary education. And district and taluk boards were created. It was insisted that the majority of the members of this board should be elected non-officials, and the local bodies were given executive power with financial resources of their own. It was perhaps the desire of Ripon that power in India should be gradually transferred to the educated Indians. He also insisted on the election of local bodies as against selection by the government. And in all these measures, Ripon concern was not so much for efficiency in administration. And instead, Ripon diffused the administration and brought the government closer to the people. And this was his most important achievement, and it was Ripon who laid the foundation of the system which functions today. Okay. And his education reform, like Lord William Bentinck, Ripon was a champion of education of the Indians. So Ripon wanted to review the working of the educational system on the basis of the recommendation of the Woods Dispatch. Hope you remember the William Bentinck we discussed. So please refer that video also. And for further improvement of the system, Ripon appointed a commission in 1882 under the chairmanship of Sir William Hunter, and the commission came to be known as the Hunter Commission. Okay, so that is the education reform under Ripon. The commission recommended for the expansion and the improvement of the elementary education of the masses, and the commission suggested two channel for the secondary education. One was literary education leading up to the entrance examination of the university, and the other preparing the students for a vocational career. And the commission noted the poor status of women education, and it encouraged the local bodies in the villages and towns to manage the elementary education. This had resulted in the extraordinary rise in the number of educational institutions in India. Okay, so that is about educational reform. And first factory act, that is on 1881. Lord Ripon introduced the factory act 1881 to improve the service condition of the factory workers in India, and the act banned the appointment of children below the age of 7 in factories. It reduced the working hours for children, and it made compulsory for all dangerous machines in the factories to be properly fenced to ensure security to the workers. So that is the first factory act 1881. And Ilbert Bill agitation 1884. Lord Ripon wanted to remove two kinds of law that had been prevalent in India. That is, according to the system of law, a European could be tried only by a European judge or a European magistrate. And uh, the disqualification was unjust, and it was sought to cast a needless discredit and dishonor upon the Indian born members of the judiciary. And C.P. Ilbert, law member, introduced a bill in 1883 to abolish this discrimination in judiciary, but Europeans opposed this bill strongly. Ilbert bill. Okay, so They even raised a fund of 1,50,000 rupees and established an organization called the Defense Association. And they also suggested that it was better to end the English rule in India than to allow the English to be subjected to the Indian judges and magistrates. And the press in England joined the issue. Hence, Ripon amended the bill to satisfy the English in India and England. And the Ilbert Bill controversy helped the cause of Indian nationalism. The Ilbert Bill controversy is high watermark in the history of Indian national movement, and Ripon was totally disillusioned and heartbroken, and he tendered his resignation and left for England. The immediate result of this awakening of India was the birth of the Indian National Congress in 1885, the very next year of Ripon departure. Okay, so estimate of Lord Ripon. Lord Ripon was most popular viceroy and England ever sent to India, and the Indians by and large hailed him as Ripon the Good, and because he was the only viceroy who handled the Indian problem with compassion and sympathy. His attempt to remove racial distinction in the judiciary, the repeal of the Vernacular Press Act, and the rendition of Mysore and the introduction of the local self government increased his popularity among Indians. And his resignation was deeply regretted by Indians who cherished his memory with gratitude. So that is the Lord Ripon time period. And after Ripon, Lord Curzon, 1899 to 1905. So this is the picture of Lord Curzon. So Lord Curzon occupies a high place among the rulers of British India like Lord Wellesley and Lord Dalhousie. And he was through imperialist, and in order to make the administration efficient, Lord Curzon overhauled the entire administrative machinery. His internal administration may be studied under the following heads. That is, one is educational reform. Curzon took a serious view of the fall in the standard of education and discipline in the educational institution. In his view, the universities had degenerated into factories for producing political revolutionaries. So, to set the educational system in order, he instituted in 1902 a university commission to go into entire question of university education in the country. On the basis of the finding, the recommendation of the commission, Curzon brought in the Indian Universities Act of 1904, which brought all the universities in India under the control of the government. Okay. Next is police and military reform. Curzon believed in efficiency and discipline, and he instituted a police commission in 1902 under the chairmanship of Sir Andrews Fraser. And Curzon accepted all the recommendations and implemented them. He set up training schools for both the officers and the constables and introduced provincial police service. As for the remodeling of the army, it was by and large done by Lord Kitchener, the commander in chief in India in Curzon's time. And Calcutta Corporation Act on 1899. The Viceroy brought in a new legislative measure, namely the Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899, by which the strength of the elected members was reduced and that of the official members increased. Curzon gave more representation to the English people as against the Indians in the Calcutta Corporation. And there was strong resentment by the Indian members against Curzon's anti people measurement. And preservation of archaeological objects. Curzon had a passion for preserving the ancient monuments of historical importance in India, and no viceroy in India before or after him took such a keen interest in archaeological objects. He passed a law called the Ancient Monument Act 1904, which made it obligatory on the part of the government and local authorities to preserve the monument of archaeological importance and their destruction an offense. And partition of Bengal 1905. The partition of Bengal into two provinces was effected on 4 July 1905. The new province of Eastern Bengal and Assam included the whole of Assam and the Decca and Rajshahi and the Chittagong divisions of Bengal with the headquarters at Deccan. And though Curzon justified his action on administrative lines, partition divided the Hindu and Muslims in Bengal. and this led to the anti-partition agitation all over the country, and this had also intensified the national movement. Okay, so that is the time of Lord Curzon. And Lord Curzon assumed his office when he was 40-year old, and all his reform measures were preceded by an expert commission and its recommendations, and he made a serious study of the Indian problem in all their aspects. And at the beginning of Curzon earned the popularity and admiration of the Indian people. He lost the popularity by the act of partition of Bengal. Okay, so that's all about this unit. So far we discussed Linton's unpopular measures such as Vernacular Press Act and inadequate handling of the famine situation, his failure in Afghan policy, which led to the murder of English officers, the Ripon's liberal reform in the sphere of education, local self government, and labor welfare, and his efforts to the end the racial discrimination in the judiciary. And that Ilbert Bill issue was also responsible for the rise of national movement, Lord Curzon's reforms, and also his anti-Indian measure of the partition of Bengal and its impact. Okay, so this is the today we end here with this, and for more content, do like, share, and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much.